Welcome, everyone. Today, I bring you a story that will shock you, surprise you, and teach you powerful lessons about history. This is not just a story. This is the real life of Joseph Stalin, the man who ruled the Soviet Union with an iron fist. Many people call him a dictator because he ruled with absolute power, eliminating anyone who stood in his way. But how did a poor boy from a small town rise to become one of the most feared leaders in history? That is the story we will uncover, piece by piece. So sit back, listen carefully, and improve your English listening skills while learning about one of the most important figures of the 20th century. Let's begin. Joseph Stalin was born on December 18, 1878, in a small town called Gori in Georgia, which was part of the Russian Empire at the time. His real name was Iosif Vissarionovich Djugashvili. The name Stalin came much later in his life. Stalin was not born into a rich or powerful family. His father, Vissarion Djugashvili, was a shoemaker, and his mother, Ekaterina Keke Geladze, was a washerwoman. They were poor, and life was difficult. His father was a violent alcoholic who often beat young Stalin and his mother. Stalin's childhood was filled with fear, pain, and struggle. This abuse shaped his personality. He learned never to show weakness and to always be strong. Despite their poverty, Stalin's mother was determined to give him a good education. She wanted him to become a priest. So, in 1888, she sent him to a church school in Gori. Here, young Stalin was different from other kids. He was small and sickly, but he had a sharp mind. He was good at reading and writing, and he loved books, especially books about revolution and power. His teachers noticed something dark about him. He was not like other children. He was serious, secretive, and sometimes cruel. He would bully weaker students and manipulate others to get what he wanted. At the age of 16, in 1894, Stalin was sent to the Tiflis Theological Seminary, a religious school, in Tbilisi, Georgia. But something changed in him. He no longer wanted to be a priest. Instead of studying religion, Stalin started reading books about revolution. He was influenced by the ideas of Karl Marx, the founder of communism. Marx's ideas taught that the poor should rise up and overthrow the rich. Stalin became obsessed with changing the world through revolution. By 1899, at the age of 21, Stalin dropped out of seminary. He no longer believed in God. He believed in revolution, power, and violence. Now Stalin was jobless, poor, and had no clear future. But he had one thing, a dream of power. He joined Marxist groups and started working as a revolutionary. His job? Spreading communist ideas, organizing strikes, and fighting against the government. But the Russian Empire was dangerous for revolutionaries. The police were always watching. Stalin had to be clever, secretive, and ruthless. To support the communist movement, Stalin started robbing banks. Yes, Stalin, before becoming a leader, was a criminal. In 1907, he organized a famous bank robbery in Tbilisi. His gang stole 250,000 rubles, millions in today's money. This made Stalin famous in the underground world of revolutionaries. But it also made him a wanted man. Soon, the Russian police caught him. Between 1902 and 1917, Stalin was arrested 7 times and sent to Siberia, a freezing, harsh land in Russia. But every time, he escaped. Each time he returned, he became more powerful, more ruthless, and more determined. He was no longer just a revolutionary. He was becoming a leader in the communist movement. By 1917, Russia was on the edge of collapse. The country was suffering from poverty, hunger, and war. The Tsar King of Russia, Nicholas II, was losing control. People were angry. The communist leader, Vladimir Lenin, saw this as the perfect moment for revolution. He and his followers, called the Bolsheviks, were planning to overthrow the government. Stalin was already working for Lenin in the background, writing articles, organizing workers, and helping to spread revolutionary ideas. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks finally seized power in what became known as the Russian Revolution. The Tsar was removed, and Lenin became the new leader of Russia. Stalin was not yet the main leader, but he was gaining power quickly. As a reward for his loyalty, Lenin gave Stalin a high position in the Communist Party. Stalin was now in charge of important government matters, but he was still working in the shadows, watching, learning, and planning his next move. But taking over Russia wasn't easy. The Bolsheviks had enemies. A civil war broke out between Lenin's Red Army, communists, and the White Army, people loyal to the old government. During this time, Stalin showed his true nature. He was sent to different battle zones to help the Red Army fight. But Stalin didn't just give orders. He ruled with fear and brutality. In 1918, in the city of Tsaritsyn, later named Stalingrad in his honor, Stalin ordered mass killings. He executed people suspected of being enemies of communism, even if they had no proof against them. He wanted to show that he was merciless, a man who never forgave betrayal. Lenin and the other Bolsheviks noticed Stalin's ruthless methods, but they also saw that he was effective. In war, fear was a weapon, and Stalin knew how to use it. By 1921, the Bolsheviks had won the Civil War. Russia was now a communist country, known as the Soviet Union, USSR. But Lenin was getting old and sick, and the question arose, who would rule after Lenin? Stalin was already preparing his plan. In 1922, Lenin gave Stalin a new title, General Secretary of the Communist Party. Many thought this position was not very important. But Stalin knew better. As General Secretary, Stalin had control over who got jobs in the communist government. This meant he could place his loyal followers in powerful positions. Slowly, without anyone noticing, he was building his own army of supporters. Meanwhile, Lenin was growing suspicious of Stalin. He started to regret giving him power. In 1923, Lenin wrote a letter, later known as Lenin's Testament, warning that Stalin was too dangerous, too rude, and too power-hungry. Lenin suggested that Stalin should be removed from his position. But before Lenin could act, he suffered a major stroke. By January 1924, Lenin was dead. Now the Soviet Union needed a new leader. There were two main candidates. 1. Leon Trotsky, a brilliant revolutionary, Lenin's close ally and leader of the Red Army. 2. Joseph Stalin, the tough, silent organizer who controlled the Communist Party from the inside. Most people thought Trotsky would win. He was smarter, more famous, and a strong speaker. But Stalin had something more powerful: manipulation. Stalin started using dirty tricks. He lied about Lenin's last wishes. He told people that Lenin wanted Stalin as leader. He secretly spread rumors that Trotsky was too arrogant and too dangerous to lead. He forged documents and used his loyal followers to slowly push Trotsky out of power. Trotsky fought back, but it was too late. By 1927, Stalin had complete control of the Communist Party. Trotsky was expelled from the Soviet Union and later murdered in 1940 on Stalin's orders. Now Stalin was the supreme leader of the Soviet Union. But he was just getting started. After gaining power, Stalin became paranoid. He believed that everyone was plotting against him. In the 1930s, Stalin launched the Great Purge, a period where millions of people were arrested, tortured, and executed. High-ranking communists were accused of fake crimes and shot. Military generals were arrested and executed. Ordinary people were taken from their homes at night, never to be seen again. Even Stalin's own friends and allies were not safe. If he suspected anyone of disloyalty, they were killed immediately. One of the most shocking stories was about Nikolai Yezhov, a high-ranking officer who helped Stalin carry out executions. Stalin used him for years, but later turned on him. Yezhov was arrested, tortured, and executed. His existence was erased from Soviet history. The Great Purge created fear across the country. People were too scared to even speak Stalin's name. He had become a godlike figure, untouchable, all-powerful, and terrifying. But his greatest crime was yet to come. In 1932 to 1933, Stalin launched a deadly plan to make the Soviet Union's farms more efficient. He forced millions of farmers to give up their land and work for the government. This was called collectivization. But the farmers resisted. They didn't want to give up their land. Stalin's response? Brutality. He took away their food supplies. He blocked cities from receiving food shipments. Anyone who complained was executed or sent to labor camps. This led to one of the worst famines in human history, especially in Ukraine, where millions of people starved to death. Parents watched their children die of hunger. Some even resorted to cannibalism to survive. This event is now known as the Holodomor, meaning death by hunger. Despite millions dying, Stalin refused to admit fault. He simply covered it up. Joseph Stalin's personal life. Before Stalin became the feared leader of the Soviet Union, his personal life was filled with tragedy. These painful events shaped him into the ruthless man he later became. His first wife. Many years ago, in 1906, Stalin married Kato Svanitsa, a kind and loving woman. They had a son, Yakov, but their happiness did not last. In 1907, Kato fell ill with typhus and died. Stalin was devastated. People say he cried at her funeral and told his friends, "With her, all my warm feelings for humanity have died." After this tragedy, Stalin became distant from his son and focused only on politics. His second wife. Years later, in 1919, Stalin married again. His second wife was Nadezhda Alliluyeva, a young and intelligent woman. They had 2 children, Vasily and Svetlana. But their marriage was not happy. Stalin was harsh and emotionally distant, which made Nadezhda suffer from depression. In 1932, after an argument with Stalin, she shot herself. Stalin never talked about her death. He told people she had died from an illness, but many believe she took her own life because she was unhappy. His children. Stalin had a complicated relationship with his children. His eldest son, Yakov, had a distant relationship with him. But in the future, during World War II, he would be captured by the Nazis. They would offer to exchange him for a German prisoner, but Stalin would refuse, saying, "I will not trade a soldier for a general." Yakov would later die in a concentration camp. His son Vasily struggled with alcoholism. and his daughter Svetlana eventually left the Soviet Union and moved to the United States, rejecting her father's rule. The loss of his wives and the suffering of his children made Stalin even colder and more ruthless. Instead of showing emotions, he buried his feelings and focused only on power. This led to one of the most brutal and feared regimes in history. Joseph Stalin was no longer just the leader of the Soviet Union. He was the most feared man in the country. He had wiped out his enemies, sent millions to labor camps, and turned himself into a godlike figure. People worshipped him, feared him, and obeyed him without question. But now he was about to face his greatest challenge ever: World War II and Adolf Hitler. This war would test Stalin's intelligence, his brutality, and his ability to survive in a world where betrayal was everywhere. This is the story of how Stalin fought the Nazis, made Russia a superpower, and continued his reign of terror. While Stalin was busy executing his enemies and controlling the Soviet Union, another dictator was rising in Germany: Adolf Hitler. Hitler was the leader of the Nazi Party, and like Stalin, he ruled with fear, propaganda, and violence. He wanted to expand Germany's land and create an empire. But to do that, he needed to attack and conquer other countries. At first, Stalin didn't care about Hitler. He thought Hitler was just another European leader. In 1939, Stalin and Hitler signed a secret deal called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. In this deal, Stalin and Hitler agreed not to attack each other. They secretly divided Europe between them. Stalin got control over parts of Poland, Finland, and the Baltic states. Stalin thought he was safe. He believed Hitler would never break their agreement. But he was wrong. On June 22, 1941, Stalin woke up to the biggest betrayal of his life. Hitler had launched a surprise attack on the Soviet Union. This was called Operation Barbarossa, and it was the largest military invasion in history. Over 3 million German soldiers invaded Russia. Thousands of tanks and planes bombed Soviet cities. Entire Russian armies were destroyed in days. Stalin was shocked. He had ignored warnings from his spies that Hitler was planning to attack. Now the Soviet Union was on the edge of collapse. For 2 weeks, Stalin disappeared. Some historians say he was so scared that he hid in his home, not knowing what to do. Others say he was planning his counterattack in secret. Finally, Stalin returned and made a speech to the Soviet people. For the first time ever, he called them brothers and sisters instead of comrades. He knew he needed them to fight for survival. But this was not an ordinary war. It was a war of blood, terror, and sacrifice. Hitler's army was advancing deep into Soviet territory. In 1942, they reached Stalingrad, the city named after Stalin himself. Hitler wanted to destroy this city to break Soviet morale. The battle that followed became one of the deadliest in history. Over 2 million people died, soldiers and civilians. The city was completely destroyed by bombs. The Soviets fought street by street, house by house, refusing to surrender. Stalin gave a brutal order: not one step back. Soldiers who tried to retreat were shot by their own commanders. After 5 months of non-stop fighting, the Soviets finally trapped Hitler's army. In February 1943, the Germans surrendered, and the Soviet Union had won the Battle of Stalingrad. This was a turning point in World War II. After Stalingrad, Hitler's army never recovered. Stalin had turned the tide of the war. But at what cost? Millions of Soviet soldiers and civilians were dead. The country was in ruins. By 1944, the Soviet army had pushed the Nazis out of Russia. Now Stalin wanted revenge. His army marched into Germany, destroying everything in their path. Soviet soldiers captured Berlin, the capital of Nazi Germany. Hitler killed himself in April 1945, knowing he had lost. On May 9, 1945, Stalin officially declared victory over Germany. The Soviet Union had won, but Stalin was not done yet. He now saw himself as the most powerful leader in the world, and he wanted to make sure no one could ever challenge him again. Even though the war was over, Stalin did not stop killing. He arrested and executed Soviet generals who had helped him win the war. He didn't want anyone else to be more powerful than him. He expanded Soviet control over Eastern Europe. Countries like Poland, Hungary, and East Germany became communist under Stalin's rule. He started the Cold War, a political and military rivalry with the United States. Stalin hated the United States and its leader, President Harry Truman. He saw America as the biggest enemy of communism. This led to decades of tension, nuclear threats, and fear between the Soviet Union and the USA. The world was now divided into two superpowers, the Communist Soviet Union versus the capitalist United States. And Stalin was determined to make the USSR the most powerful country on Earth, no matter how many people had to die. By 1948, Stalin was almost 70 years old, but his paranoia was stronger than ever. He believed that even his closest allies were plotting against him. He ordered more purges. Top communist leaders were arrested, tortured, and executed. He targeted Jewish doctors, accusing them of planning to poison him. He lived in complete isolation, afraid of being assassinated. People around him were too scared to even look him in the eyes. He had become a prisoner of his own fear. Joseph Stalin ruled with an iron fist, controlling every aspect of Soviet life. He sent millions of people to their deaths, created one of the most powerful nations in the world, and spread fear across the Soviet Union and beyond. But even the most powerful dictators do not live forever. By 1953, Stalin was almost 75 years old. But even in his old age, he was still obsessed with power and paranoid about betrayal. He did not trust anyone, not even his closest allies. He rarely left his private residence, a huge estate outside of Moscow. He surrounded himself with guards and doctors, always fearing an assassination attempt. He constantly ordered more arrests, believing that enemies were hiding everywhere. His final days were filled with paranoia and terror. But no one expected that the man who had caused millions of deaths would soon be struggling for his own life, alone and helpless. On the evening of February 28, 1953, Stalin had dinner with his closest officials, Lavrenti Beria, the head of the secret police, Nikita Khrushchev, Georgy Malenkov, and others. They drank a lot of alcohol, as Stalin often did. They laughed and talked about purging more people from the government. Stalin seemed completely fine. No one suspected that this would be his last night alive. But the next morning, something strange happened. Stalin did not come out of his bedroom. His guards waited for hours, too afraid to check on him. They knew that disturbing Stalin's sleep could mean death. Finally, at 10 p.m., one of the guards gathered his courage and entered Stalin's room. What he saw was terrifying. Stalin was lying on the floor, unable to move. His eyes were wide open, but he could not speak. He had urinated on himself, showing he had been there for hours. The most powerful man in the Soviet Union was now helpless, lying on the ground like a dying animal. But the nightmare was just beginning. Even though Stalin was clearly dying, his guards and ministers did not immediately call the doctors. Why? Because Stalin had recently ordered the arrest of many doctors, accusing them of being traitors. His own paranoia had cost him his life. For 12 hours, no one dared to act. Doctors were too afraid to come because they thought Stalin might punish them if he recovered. His officials were too scared to make decisions without Stalin's orders. The man who had controlled life and death for millions of people was now dying in silence, surrounded by people too scared to help him. Finally, in the morning of March 2nd, 1953, doctors were called, but it was too late. Stalin was paralyzed on his right side. His breathing was heavy and slow. He could not talk, could not move, and could barely stay awake. For 3 days, Stalin suffered in silence. His mouth opened and closed, as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Was he trying to beg for help? Was he terrified? Or was he cursing the people around him? No one will ever know. Then, on March 5th, 1953, at 9:50 p.m., Joseph Stalin took his final breath. His face twisted in agony, his hands clenched into fists, and his body shook violently before becoming still. His final expression was one of terror, as if he had seen something horrifying before he died. And just like that, the most feared man in the world was dead. But what happened after his death was just as shocking as his life. As soon as Stalin died, the Soviet government went into total chaos. Who would take his place? What would happen to the Soviet Union? Would Stalin's terror continue? At first, Stalin's right-hand man, Lavrenti Beria, took control. Beria was just as cruel and dangerous as Stalin, and he planned to rule just like him. But the other Soviet leaders feared Beria. They knew he would kill them all to stay in power. So just 3 months after Stalin's death, they made a shocking move. In June 1953, Beria was arrested and executed, the same way he had executed so many others before. Nikita Khrushchev slowly took power, becoming the new leader of the Soviet Union. He began to reveal the truth about Stalin, the mass killings, the purges, and the lies. Finally, in 1956, Khrushchev gave a secret speech, exposing Stalin as a cruel dictator. Stalin's statues were taken down. His body was removed from Lenin's tomb. His name was erased from history books. The world finally learned the truth about Stalin's terror. But for the millions who had suffered, it was too late. Even today, Stalin remains one of the most controversial figures in history. Was he a hero who saved the Soviet Union from Hitler? Or was he a monster who murdered millions of innocent people? Was he a genius leader or a paranoid tyrant, dictators? There is no simple answer. Stalin turned the Soviet Union into a global superpower, but at the cost of countless lives. Some still admire him, believing he made Russia great. Others see him as one of history's worst villains, responsible for more deaths than Hitler. One thing is certain: his impact on the world will never be forgotten. Joseph Stalin lived and died in power, leaving behind a legacy of fear and destruction. But now I want to ask you, was Stalin a necessary leader, or was he pure evil? Did his actions make the world better or worse? Let me know in the comments below. Joseph Stalin's life and leadership teach us several lessons, both positive and negative. Here are some important takeaways. Power can be dangerous. Stalin had absolute power, and he used it to control people and remove anyone who disagreed with him. Lesson: Too much power without checks and balances can lead to cruelty and dictatorship. Fear can control people. Stalin ruled with fear. He made people afraid to speak against him. Lesson: leaders should earn respect, not control people through fear. Hard work and determination can change a nation. Stalin turned the Soviet Union into a world superpower. He industrialized the country and strengthened its military. Lesson: hard work and determination can bring big changes, but success should not come at the cost of human lives. Trust and loyalty matter. Stalin did not trust anyone, not even his closest friends. He removed or killed many of them. Lesson: without trust, relationships, and even governments can fall apart. Knowledge and education are powerful. Stalin was well-read and used information as a weapon. He controlled education, the media, and what people were allowed to learn. Lesson: education is powerful. It should be used to help people, not control them. Stalin's life teaches us that power must be used wisely. Leadership should be about helping people, not controlling them. History remembers both good and bad leaders, so the choices we make define how we will be remembered. And if you found this story powerful and shocking, make sure to subscribe for more incredible historical stories. Because history is full of dark secrets, and the truth is often more terrifying than fiction. Hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next story.